Hey everybody, welcome. Ben Mankiewicz here, TYT Interviews. Joining me right to my left is documentary filmmaker Alex Gibney. Alex, thanks for being here.
Delighted, Ben.
Well, when you've got the Scientology documentary Going Clear, which debuted on HBO in March, comes out in theaters at the end of September 25th, right?
That's right.
And the other movie you have now in theaters, Steve Jobs. But we were talking about politics right before, and considering the people who you have been the subjects of your documentaries. I also saw yesterday, what I hadn't seen was the WikiLeaks documentary. You got a lot of criticism from WikiLeaks after the Assange doc. I mean, maybe more than from Scientology, or similar?
In very interesting ways, the kind of criticism was extremely similar. A lot of online vilification, a lot of wild and inaccurate stuff. And I found the vitriol to be about the same. And that's saying a lot, considering Scientology. But for me, from the WikiLeaks side, it was just a little bit unexpected.
Yeah.
So Scientology, I certainly expected that.
Right,
and having been through the deluge with the WikiLeaks acolytes, I was oddly prepared, more prepared for Scientology.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I saw the Assange thing yesterday, and I read the Chris Hedges piece, and and then I read a defense of you in, I think, Slate or Salon. And it was just, you're like, wow, man, these are not the people who are supposed to be fighting. This didn't.
Well,
which I
you know,
sense
honestly,
is the way you felt. Right.
I hope that the film would be a place of dialogue, and for many people it was.
Definitely.
But I think the first half of the WikiLeaks film is basically a praise poem about Julian Assange.
Yes.
But I did note some issues, some problems, and that seemed to be unacceptable for people. There's a huge, I find this a lot, where there seems to be a huge need in this society to play thumbs up or thumbs down.
There is.
You're either all good or you're all bad. And the idea that, you can analyze people's actions, this one we can criticize, this one, we should praise. What's wrong with that? I don't really get the problem there.
In the Steve Jobs documentary, you talked to a couple of journalists who got hammered after doing stories on Apple, which I think they thought were obviously fair pieces of journalism, or they wouldn't have done them.
Well, more than that, I mean, Steve Jobs was furious that one magazine in particular, Fortune, would assign a reporter who hadn't been sanctified by Steve Jobs himself. The way Apple did things was to say, here's the reporter we want to do the story, and here's what he'll write. It's good. It's a good gig if you can get it. It's good to be king, I guess.
Yeah. So, but explain that story just in a little more depth, because Steve Jobs meets Apple, says, we'd like to meet. Fortune says we'd like to do some stories, and at first he's like, oh, great. And then he says, here's how it's going to be.
Here's how it's going to be. Here's the writer who's going to do the story, and here's the tack that you'll take. And the editor of Fortune, Andy Serwer, said, I'm sorry, Steve, that's not the way we do things. Sadly, for many publications, it is often the way things are done, but at Fortune, no.
How valuable to Scientology is Tom Cruise and John Travolta?
John Travolta, not so much now. He was the key guy way back in the day when he was doing Saturday Night Fever. But the key guy for Scientology is Tom Cruise. He is the face of the religion. Most people, if you ask them on the street, what's Scientology? They say it's that Tom Cruise religion.
Right.
And so he, it seems to me, has a huge responsibility in terms of being the public face of that religion, because actually people get into that religion because of him. He's the draw.
There were some stories, I don't know how reputable the sources were, that because they wanted to, what's the phrase they use when you're a suppressive person?
A suppressive person, yeah.
That there were some stories, and again, I don't know how reputable they were, that Scientology was declaring that Suri was a suppressive person that would prevent him from seeing his daughter, who's 7, which is just unconscionable to any father, and that he was thinking of leaving. Have you heard that? Do you buy that? Does that make any sense?
Well,
And would they ever risk that? Why would they risk that? That's what I thought.
I am told that that they tried very hard. A number of people told me they tried very hard to declare Nicole Kidman a suppressive person, and also, more horribly, to work on their kids until they believed that she was a suppressive person. So much so that
They have 2 kids together.
Yeah, well, they adopted two kids.
Adopted 2 kids.
And so much so that, in fact, they, they were told how to act around a suppressive person, which is, mommy's evil, Nicole Kidman's evil, she's a suppressive person, but because you can't really trust suppressive people, be sure to smile around her and don't let her know that she's a suppressive person. Just seems to me that is the most insidious and disturbing kind of interference in people's private lives that makes you wonder. I mean, this is an organization to which we give a tax deduction?
Don't Tom Cruise and John Travolta, mostly Cruise now because of his power, but don't they have a responsibility?
They have a huge responsibility to speak out, or at least to address these very credible allegations of human rights abuses. I mean, these human rights abuses are so well documented, but they won't even address them. And worse, we, and when I say we, members of the journalistic community, particularly on TV, when Tom Cruise goes on a talk tour for, let's take an example, Mission Impossible.
Sure, good example. Yeah.
It's a fairly recent one. Nobody will ask him. And in fact, that's part of the deal. If you want Tom on your program, you have to agree not to ask him about Scientology. Well, these are the games that get played around. That's why, all these issues, when people get upset about how they're treated, everybody wants to be their own press agent, to craft and sculpt.
Like Steve Jobs.
Like Steve Jobs, like Julian Assange, to sculpt images of themselves that they can control.